All right, so here's your long-awaited screencast over memory. So memory is your ability to code, store, and retrieve information. So it's how you get information into your brain, how you store it, and how you get it out for when you need it later. So memory involves coding the input of the senses, and that's usually visual or auditory, so we call that sensory memory. Memory is rarely perfect. We're not perfect beings. We don't have typically photographic memories. So our memories are kind of a construction of experiences and a whole host of different things that we'll get to in a little bit. Forgetting refers to memory failure, meaning that your memory fails, obviously. All right, the three processes of memory, and the first process is encoding, and that gets information to the brain. So in some way, shape, or form, the information gets into your brain. Storage is how that information is retained. And then retrieval is the process of taking the information out of your memory storage so that you're able to use it. All right, so just a quick little example that you can look at. All right, so the three stages of memory are, sensory memory, where you hold your sensory information. Iconic memory and echoic memory, remember we talked about those as parts of your sensory memory. It has a very large capacity, but the duration is very, very short. In order to keep things to take things from your sensory memory and then use them, you need to put them in your short-term memory, or it's also called your working memory. The capacity is about 7 items, and the duration is about 30 seconds. You can keep things there longer if you do a maintenance rehearsal or something in order to keep information in your short-term memory. It's also the place that your memories go when you're going to be using them immediately. And then you have long-term memory, and that's where it can be infinite. It's huge capacity, long duration, and that's where most of your information is stored. All right, so if you take a look at this picture, the stuff here at the bottom where it says information not transferred, it says is lost. Cut the screen off, but you get the idea. All right, now long-term memory is when information is transferred from your short-term memory into long-term memory. It's coded into some type of category, and it's stored in terms of meaning. So you put them in different categories. Remember I put the picture up on the board of, we started with like a few words and then got them all into different categories. So memories that are retrieved from your long-term memory aren't exact replicas of the original event because they're reconstructed. And because you put them back together before you use them, sometimes they can be altered. And in a lot of cases, they are altered. All right, so we have 3 types of memory. You have procedural memory, which is a motor skill. So you can see the kid riding the bicycle. Semantic memory is factual information. So the first president of the United States is George Washington, grammar rules, things that most people would tend to know. And then episodic memory is autobiographical. And so these are how you interpret an event, your information about where, when, what happened. And so everyone's episodic memory can be different because we all perceive and experience things in different ways. All right, just a quick overview. You will need to know what explicit and implicit memories are. So explicit memories or declarative memories are those that occur with conscious recalls, things you have to think about in order to consciously recall them. Implicit or non-declarative memories are things that occur without conscious recall. So procedural memory, you don't have to stop and consciously think about how to ride a bicycle or think about how to walk or how to do a backflip if you've done them before. So these would be kind of like motor skills, actions, things like that. All right, so your long-term memory is organized into categories that form a hierarchy. And there's lots of different paths, direct paths, indirect paths that you're able to make connections to. So sometimes the cues required to recall an item are not sufficient. And so therefore, you have what's called the tip of the tongue phenomenon. And I can guarantee you all have had this happen to you in your lifetime, probably in the last week. And this happens when a person can't easily recall an item, but they show some recall for its characteristics. So you know, oh, it starts with the letter A, gosh, I can't think of it, and then you have to stop and process, or you're trying to think of a person and you can think of what they look like, and they like to wear this blue shirt, and they always sit at this table at lunch, but you can't remember their name. So that's tip of the tongue. And so sometimes the cue just comes later, and usually when you don't need the information anymore. All right, recognition is when there's a specific cue, like a face or a name, that's matched against long-term memory. So if you're given pictures and say it, and you have to pick out which one's Hillary Clinton, you would be able to recognize from these pictures. So we went through this, pick out the names of the 7 dwarves, but the bottom ones are cut off. And your answers are sleepy, dopey, grumpy, sneezy, happy, doc, and bashful. And that would be recall. So recall is when a general cue is used to search your memory. So recall is if I asked you to name the 7 dwarves and you had to just remember without any type of cue, whereas recognition, the one before, you had a list and you had to pick the ones out of that list. Recall tends to be a little bit more difficult task for a lot of people because you don't necessarily have the right cue that you need, and lots of people do much better on recognition, and multiple choice tests are typically recognition type tests, whereas essay tests test your recall. All right, Santa's reindeer would be a test of recall. All right, so relearning happens when you have a situation where you learn material a second time. So lots of times in your classes, your math class especially at the beginning of the year, they'll review all of the stuff that you did before. And sometimes you're relearning it, and the memory is evident in the savings of time that you save to relearn the second time versus the first. So the idea is once you've learned it a first time, having to learn it again doesn't take as long. All right, flashbulb memories are vivid images of circumstances associated with very emotional events. And typically with a flashbulb memory, you remember a lot more details about it. You might remember what you're wearing, you might remember what your hair looked like, you might remember where you were sitting, things that you wouldn't typically remember, but since it was such a highly emotional event, you're able to recall more information about it. All right, forgetting is the inability to recall previously learned information, and we forget things all the time for a variety of different reasons that we'll get into in just a few minutes. All right, so one of the ways that we kind of tend to forget things is the serial position effect. And the serial position effect basically states that we remember the information at the beginning of a list and at the end of the list better than the items in the middle. And the reason for that is we've had more time to rehearse the ones at the bottom, and the ones at the top of the list, and the ones at the bottom are fresher in our minds. So here we go. You can pause these if you like. All right, now how you can improve your memory is by spacing out your practice sessions. So distributed practice refers to spacing learning periods in contrast to massed practice, which means that you're cramming your learning into a single session. So the more you spread your learning out over periods of time, the more likely you are to retain that information. So if you're studying for your test the night before, and that's the only studying you've done, you're probably not going to do as well as if you had studied a little bit at a time. All right, chunking is when we organize information into familiar, manageable units. And so the idea is that you you put them into larger pieces so that you have fewer pieces to remember. And lots of times it occurs automatically. So here's a number list for you. And it should have been easier when you have it chunked together. All right, now there's several theories of why we forget. The first one is the decay theory, that your memory just fades over time. The whole idea, you don't use it, you lose it. You have other memories that you just don't have because they've faded away. You haven't thought about it in a long time. You haven't had the right cue to pull that out of your long-term memory. You also have the interference theory that says that information competes for retrieval. And so proactive interference happens when old information interferes with the recall of new information. So like the example of me learning Spanish, the old French that I learned in high school kept getting in the way of me learning certain things in Spanish, like colors and masculine masculine and feminine versions of the words. And then retroactive interference means that new information interferes with the recall of old information. So if you can't remember last year's locker number because of this year's locker number, that would be retroactive interference. And so you can think of retroactive as being something, retro is old, so you can't remember the old information because of the new. And here's just a graphic and another. All right, we also have what's called motivated forgetting, and this involves the loss of painful memories, and it's protective memory loss. So we're motivated to forget because the memories are too painful for us to remember. So repression is unconscious forgetting. So you don't know that you're doing it. It's just things that are really traumatic or anxiety producing. Lots of times repressed memories are things that are like sexual abuse or physical abuse when you're a child, witnessing a very, very traumatic event. And then suppression is a conscious exclusion of those thoughts or feelings. And the idea behind those is maybe you've been embarrassed or something, and these typically the suppressed memories aren't as severe as the ones that are repressed. And so you're just kind of like, I'm not going to think about that anymore. I don't want to think about it. I'm done. And then you just don't think about it anymore, and then soon you've forgotten. And then you also have retrieval failure. And that means that it's in your long-term memory, but you haven't had the right retrieval cue to pull that information out. All right, sometimes we have what's called encoding failure, and that's when you can't recall specific features because it's not effectively encoded. So when we look at the next slide, these pennies, you can pause it here, the reason that you're going to have a hard time figuring this out is because you've never taken the time to encode exactly what the details of a penny are, because it's not an important function of your daily life. All right, so we can have amnesia, which is forgetting that's happens because of a brain injury or because of trauma. Retrograde amnesia refers to problems with recall of information prior to a trauma, so prior to the injury. You don't remember things that happened prior to the injury. And it doesn't mean you forget your whole entire life up until that point, but you could have periods of amnesia. But anterograde amnesia refers to problems with recall of information after a trauma. So if you look at the little chart here, the point of trauma, if it's after the point of trauma, it's anterograde. If it's before the point of trauma, it's retrograde. And then Alzheimer's disease is a progressive mental deterioration that's characterized by severe memory loss that occurs most commonly in old age. They may forget little things about their lives, they may forget big things about their lives, they may forget how to care for themselves, etc. Lots of Alzheimer's patients end up in nursing homes. All right, the one on the left is a normal brain, the one on the right is an Alzheimer's brain, and so the orange and kind of yellow areas show brain activity. All right, you can pause this as you need. All right, so memory recall may involve reconstruction and thus may not be accurate, which is why we get false memories. So I will just put these, put these real quick. You can pause it, write that down, pause some more. And here are some memory strategies. Mnemonic devices are strategies that improve your memory by organizing your information. And here are a few more. Oops, sorry. And you can pause this. You can pause this. You can pause this. All right, so other things that you can do to improve your memory: you can pay attention and avoid interference, use rehearsal techniques, improve the organization of your memory, and you can learn to manage your time. And my time is up, so study hard and do well on your test.